The morning Marcus Hale arrived at his own corporate headquarters smelling like rain-soaked concrete and carrying absolutely nothing was the morning everything in his carefully constructed life began to quietly crack open.
It wasn't supposed to happen this way.
At 33, Marcus owned Hale Innovations, a tech empire worth $4.7 billion that stretched from the glass towers of Manhattan to satellite offices in 12 countries. He had a penthouse on the 58th floor of a building that bore his name. He had a personal chef, a private driver, 3 assistants who managed his calendar down to the minute, and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's annual salaries. He had everything the world agreed a man should want, and he wore all of it with the practiced ease of someone who had long since stopped feeling the weight of it. But that Tuesday in October, a freak accident on the FDR Drive had left his car crumpled against a guardrail. He was physically fine, just shaken, his phone shattered, his briefcase somewhere the tow truck had swallowed, and Marcus Hale had done something he hadn't done in over a decade. He walked through the rain, 12 blocks, alone, without a single person recognizing him because he was wearing a plain gray hoodie he kept in the back seat for gym days, and because billionaires aren't supposed to walk anywhere, so nobody thinks to look for them on the sidewalk. He arrived at the staff entrance of Hale Tower, the only door still on his badge, since his executive credentials were all digital and stored on the phone now drowning in the back seat of a crushed Mercedes, and found himself in the building's basement corridor for the very first time in his life. It smelled like industrial cleaner and coffee and something warm he couldn't immediately identify. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A rolling cart of cleaning supplies sat against one wall. And from somewhere around the corner came the sound of a child singing. It stopped him completely. The voice was small and slightly off-key and absolutely unbothered by this, the way only very young children sing, with the total conviction that their song is the most important sound the world has ever produced. Marcus stood in his wet hoodie and listened, and something in his chest did a thing it hadn't done in a very long time. It softened. He followed the sound without entirely meaning to. She was sitting on a folded moving blanket in the corner of a small break room that clearly belonged to the building's cleaning staff, a little girl, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, with dark curly pigtails and enormous brown eyes and a plastic container of animal crackers in her lap. She was singing to a stuffed elephant that was missing one eye, and she was doing so with her whole body, swaying from side to side with the kind of commitment most adults have entirely forgotten how to access. When she saw Marcus standing in the doorway, she didn't scream or startle or run. She just looked at him with those enormous eyes, considered him for a moment the way toddlers consider everything, with complete, scientific seriousness, and then held out an animal cracker in his direction. "Hippo," she announced, as if this explained everything. As if offering him a hippopotamus-shaped cracker was the most natural greeting in the world. Marcus Hale, who negotiated with governments, who had made grown men in boardrooms sweat through their suits with a single look, who had not been disarmed by anything in longer than he could accurately remember, stood in a basement break room doorway and felt his throat tighten. "Thank you," he said, and took the cracker, and she went back to singing. Her name was Lily. He would learn this a few minutes later when her mother came through the door carrying a mop bucket and a look of complete, mortified horror that transformed her face the moment she saw a stranger crouching on the floor near her daughter. The woman moved so fast that Marcus barely had time to stand before she was between him and Lily, one arm sweeping the little girl behind her with the instinctive, total protectiveness of a mother who had learned early that the world required defending against. "Who are you?" she demanded, and her voice didn't shake at all, which impressed him. "I work here," he said, which was technically the most accurate and also the most absurd answer he'd ever given to any question. Her name was Sophia Reyes. She was 28 years old. She had been cleaning the offices of Hale Tower for 14 months, arriving at 5 in the morning and leaving at 2 in the afternoon, and she had never, not once, seen the man who owned the building in person. She knew his name from the letterhead on the employee handbook and from the enormous gold letters above the main entrance, and from the way the upper management spoke about him in the same hushed, slightly reverent tone people use when discussing weather systems and distant kings. She did not recognize him now, in his wet gray hoodie with his dark hair plastered to his forehead, crouching in her break room eating her daughter's animal crackers. He looked like someone's younger brother who had gotten lost. He looked entirely human, which was not at all what she had expected from the concept of Marcus Hale. Sophia Reyes, he read from her ID badge, because he needed something to do with the strange feeling currently occurring in his chest. How long has your daughter been coming to work with you? She stiffened immediately. He watched the calculation move across her face, the fear, the exhaustion, the furious internal debate about whether honesty was safe. Her daycare is closed on Tuesdays, she said carefully. It won't happen again. I'm not. He started, then stopped, then started again. I'm not going to report you. She looked at him with an expression that said she had heard that kind of reassurance before and had learned to hold it at arm's length until proven true. He respected that. He sat down on one of the break room chairs, plastic, slightly unsteady, and Lily immediately climbed onto the chair beside him and offered him another cracker. Elephant, she said gravely. My favorite, he replied, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in recent memory. Sophia watched this exchange with an expression he couldn't fully read, something complicated living behind her eyes, something that had seen too much difficulty to trust ease when it appeared. She sat down slowly, like a woman who had learned to rest in small stolen moments because large ones were never guaranteed. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a battered maker on the counter and pushed one toward him without asking if he wanted it, which was the most natural thing anyone had done for him in years. You really work here? She asked. I really do. Doing what? He wrapped both hands around the warm mug and looked across the small table at this woman with her careful eyes and her singing daughter and her honest question, and for reasons he couldn't have fully articulated, he told her the truth in the simplest possible way. I own it. The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of conversation. Then Lily pressed an animal cracker shaped like a lion into his palm, and Sophia Reyes let out a single, exhausted, almost involuntary laugh, the kind that escapes a person before they can decide whether it's safe, and Marcus Hale felt the crack in his chest widen just a little more, like a window opening after a very long winter. 3 weeks passed before he saw her again, which was entirely his own fault. Marcus had spent those 3 weeks doing something profoundly unlike himself, trying not to do something. He had an instinct, one that had built him an empire, to act on information immediately, to identify what needed solving and deploy resources accordingly. He had gone up to his office that morning, retrieved his emergency phone from his desk drawer, and spent the rest of the day answering questions from people who needed things from him, which was every person in his life. But underneath all of it, like a frequency he couldn't tune out, ran the memory of a little girl offering him a cracker with the word hippo as her entire explanation, and a woman sitting across a plastic table with cautious eyes and honest questions and the kind of dignity that doesn't require anyone's permission to exist. He had pulled Sophia Reyes's HR file, not to review it for any disciplinary reason, but just to read it, which felt uncomfortably close to something he didn't want to examine too carefully. 14 months of employment. Perfect attendance record, which was remarkable. Single mother. Previous address different from current one, which suggested a move within the last year. No complaints, no incidents. One commendation from a floor manager for staying 2 hours late without being asked when a water main broke on the 23rd floor. He put the file away and told himself the matter was concluded. It was not, of course, concluded. He started taking the elevator to the basement on Tuesday mornings. He told himself it was because there was renovation work temporarily, making his usual route noisy. This was not true, and he knew it wasn't true, and he continued doing it anyway. On the third Tuesday, he finally stopped constructing the fiction and simply admitted to himself, while standing in the elevator, that he was hoping to hear someone singing. He didn't hear singing. What he heard instead, as he turned the corner toward the break room, was a woman's voice speaking in low, measured tones that were clearly designed to communicate calm while experiencing its opposite, and a small voice responding in that particular toddler register that exists somewhere between a question and a declaration. "Mama, I hungry." "I know, baby. Just a little bit, okay? We'll eat at home. But I hungry now." "I know." A pause. The particular texture of that pause, compressed and tired and holding something back, was something Marcus recognized from a version of his own childhood he had spent 33 years building a fortress against remembering. He stepped into the break room doorway. Sophia was at the small table with Lily in her lap, and on the table in front of them was a vending machine bag of crackers and an apple that had seen better days. Sophia was cutting the apple with a small pocket knife into precise, careful pieces, each slice measured to make the most of what was there. She looked up when he appeared, and the expression that crossed her face was the specific exhausted pride of someone caught in a moment of scarcity by someone they would have chosen not to witness it. "Mister," she stopped. She still didn't actually know his full name, he realized. They had spoken twice in the break room before he'd had to take a call and leave, and he had not properly introduced himself either time, because the situation had never felt like one that required formality. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus." She said his name the way a person says a word they're deciding whether to trust. "There's a food truck outside," he said. "The one on the north side of the building. They do breakfast and lunch." "I know," she said simply. Of course she knew. She walked past it every day. He had watched it from his window. The line of people in the morning, office workers and construction crews and the woman who sold handmade jewelry on the corner, and he had ordered from it exactly once, to be polite at a photo opportunity his PR team had arranged, and he had not thought about the cost for even a fraction of a second, because cost was not a category his life currently required. He said nothing else. He sat down at the table, same plastic chair, same slight wobble, and Lily looked up at him and said Ella, which appeared to be the name she had assigned him, possibly derived from her stuffed elephant, and climbed into the chair beside him as she had done before. "Ella," he asked Sophia. "She named you after her elephant," Sophia said, with a helpless half-smile. "I'm sorry. She names things. Constantly." "I'm honored," he said, and he meant this sincerely. He left 20 minutes later when his assistant texted from upstairs with a particular urgency that meant someone somewhere was waiting on something only he could authorize. He went up to his floor, signed what needed signing, approved what needed approving, redirected 2 conversations that were wasting everyone's time, and then, at the end of the day, he walked back out through the glass doors of the lobby and straight to the food truck on the north side of his building. "The burger," he said to the man behind the window, large, paper-wrapped, the smell of it doing something immediately persuasive to the air around it. "The good one." $12, the man said. Marcus was reaching for his wallet when a small sound made him turn. Lily was standing behind him on the sidewalk. She was not alone. Sophia was behind her, hand firmly on her daughter's shoulder, still in her work uniform, clearly on her way to the bus stop, and she was looking at Marcus with an expression that had shifted from surprise to carefully neutral in the span of about 1 second. But Lily had no such calibration. Lily had seen the food truck the same way she saw everything, as a direct and unconditional fact, and she had already made her decision. She walked up to the window with the particular absolute confidence of a 3-year-old who has not yet been taught that the world might not accommodate her, and she reached into the pocket of her tiny jacket, a little denim thing with a strawberry patch on the sleeve, and produced a crumpled $5 bill that was clearly every dollar she had in the world. She placed it on the counter. She looked up at the man in the window with those enormous, serious eyes.
"Burger, please," she said.
For the man. The food truck worker looked at the bill. He looked at the little girl. He looked at Marcus. He looked back at the little girl. "Sweetheart." Sophia started, reaching for her. "No, Mama," Lily said with profound dignity. "I got it." Marcus did not breathe. Something was happening in his chest that he didn't have a clinical name for, but that felt like being handed something he had not known he was waiting to receive. He looked at that crumpled $5 bill on the counter, placed there by a 3-year-old with a strawberry patch on her jacket and an eyeless stuffed elephant at home, and something in the fortress he had spent 33 years constructing shifted on its foundation. He looked at Sophia. Her eyes were bright, and she was biting the inside of her cheek, which he was learning was what she did when she was feeling something she hadn't decided how to navigate yet. He picked up the $5 bill very carefully, like it was something valuable, and it was more than Lily could possibly know, and he held it out to her. "Tell you what," he said, crouching down to her level. "You keep this one, and I'll buy the burger. Deal?" She considered him with enormous seriousness. She looked at the bill. She looked at him. She put the $5 back in her pocket with the gravity of a businesswoman finalizing a negotiation.
"Deal," she said.
Then she looked up at him with those wide, serious eyes and asked him, in a perfectly clear and earnest voice, for the one favor that made Marcus Hale completely forget, for a full 10 seconds, how to speak. "Can you be my daddy at dinner?" The food truck operator suddenly found something extremely important to attend to inside his truck. A passing businessman altered his route around the small tableau on the sidewalk without quite understanding why. A pigeon landed on the corner, reconsidered, and departed. The October wind moved through the tunnel of buildings with the particular gentleness of something trying not to disturb a moment that had achieved its own gravity. Marcus Hale remained crouched on the sidewalk with Lily's $5 bill returned to her pocket and her question suspended in the air between them like the last note of a song that hasn't resolved yet. "Can you be my daddy at dinner?" He looked at her. She looked back at him with absolute sincerity. No subtext, no agenda, no awareness that she had just reached into a man's chest and rearranged the furniture. She was 3. She had identified a gap in the world as she experienced it and had proposed a practical solution in the straightforward way that 3-year-olds solve problems, which is to say without any of the protective armor adults accumulate to avoid appearing to want things. He became aware, slowly, that Sophia had gone very still behind her daughter. He straightened up and looked at her. Sophia's face was doing something complex and human, the blush of embarrassment, the flicker of pain that her daughter's question carried underneath it, the ready apology already forming. She was the kind of woman who moved quickly to defuse things he was learning, who smoothed over edges before anyone got cut. "Lily, baby, that's not," she started. "She doesn't have to take it back," Marcus said quietly. Sophia looked at him. "The question," he said. "She doesn't have to take it back." A long pause. Then, "Marcus. She's 3. She doesn't understand what she's asking." "She understands exactly what she's asking," he said gently because it was true. "She wants someone to sit at the table with you at dinner. She wants the shape of a family at a meal. That's a completely reasonable thing to want." Sophia's jaw tightened and her eyes went brilliant, and he watched her fight something back with the effortful self-containment of a woman who had learned to keep herself together in the presence of her child regardless of what the world was doing to her. "We're fine," she said, which was the thing people said when they were managing. "I know you're fine," he said carefully. I'm not suggesting otherwise. Lily had moved on from the question, the way toddlers do. She was now investigating a crack in the sidewalk with intense focus, crouching over it and pressing her small finger into it like a geologist taking a reading. She had asked her question and released it to the universe, and was confident the universe was handling it. Marcus bought 3 burgers. He wasn't sure when he made this decision. He was at the window with his card, and the words came out of his mouth. 3 of the large ones, the good ones, and the food truck operator accepted this with the studied professional neutrality of someone who had learned to meet whatever occurred outside his window, without extensive commentary. I know a bench, Marcus said to Sophia. Around the corner. In that little plaza they put in when they renovated the corner building. It's warm from the afternoon sun at this time of day.
If you wanted, he stopped.
He was Marcus Hale. He did not fumble sentences. He did not trail off. He did not stand on sidewalks in the October wind asking women he barely knew if they wanted to sit on benches. Only if you have time, he finished, which was not a significantly more graceful conclusion. Sophia looked at him for a long moment with those careful, searching eyes. Then she looked at her daughter, who had stood back up from the sidewalk crack and was now looking up at Marcus with her arms raised in the universal toddler signal for "you will carry me now." She doesn't do that with people, Sophia said quietly. She doesn't usually. She's shy, actually, with strangers. It normally takes her weeks to warm up to someone new. Marcus looked at Lily's raised arms, and the $5 bill in her jacket pocket, and the strawberry patch on her sleeve, and the total unconditional confidence with which she had decided he was trustworthy. He picked her up. She immediately grabbed his collar with one hand and pointed toward the plaza with the other, as if directing a convoy. That way, she said, with complete authority. The bench was warm. The burgers were extraordinary, the kind of food that only exists at slightly ramshackle food trucks operated by people who care more about the burger than the brand, which is the only kind of food that ever achieves genuine greatness. The plaza was small and mostly empty at this hour, the fountain in its center turned off for the season, but still beautiful in its stillness. They ate without rushing. This was itself a radical act, Marcus recognized. He ate at his desk, or in cars, or in meetings where the food was incidental to the negotiation happening around it. He could not, genuinely, remember the last time he had eaten somewhere for no reason other than the fact that the food was good and the bench was warm, and there was nowhere else he particularly needed to be. Lily ate her burger with the focused commitment of someone for whom every meal is an event, pausing periodically to make observations about her food. Cheese, she said, at one point, with deep satisfaction, like someone confirming a long-held theory. Sophia ate with the particular controlled politeness of someone trying not to reveal how hungry they were, which meant she was very hungry. He pretended not to notice. He had learned from his own private history that being seen in hunger before you were ready was one of the most exposing things that could happen to a person, and he would not do that to her. She asks about her father sometimes, Sophia said eventually, not looking at him, watching Lily explore a nearby planter. Not very often, but sometimes. Usually she asks if the man at the grocery store is her daddy, or the man at the bus stop. She's not, she doesn't know him. He left before she was born. She doesn't feel his absence the way I feel it for her.
She just has this, she paused.
Chose her words. This slot in her understanding of the world. A daddy-shaped space. And occasionally, she tries to fill it with whatever's available. She said this last part with a small, rueful, heartbreaking laugh. What about you? He asked quietly. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. I stopped feeling that particular absence a long time ago, she said, and he believed her, and he also understood that it was possible to stop feeling an absence while still carrying its weight. Lily came back to the bench and climbed up between them and resumed eating her burger with great concentration. She leaned slightly against Marcus's arm without appearing to notice she was doing it. He sat very still, The way you do when something small and wild has decided you're safe, because you understand instinctively that the wrong movement could end the moment. Sophia watched this, and something in her face moved like weather. She named you Ella, she said quietly. I know, he said. She's never named anyone else anything, she said. He looked at Lily, who was now trying to make her remaining French fries stand upright in her burger wrapper as an engineering experiment. He thought about a $5 bill, crumpled from living in a small jacket pocket, pressed onto a food truck counter. He thought about being named by a child who chose names only for things she loved. Sophia, he said carefully, what do you actually need? Not want, not wish for. Actually need, right now in your life. She was quiet for a long time. The fountain didn't run. A leaf crossed the plaza in the wind. Lily's fry achieved vertical stability, and she gasped with delight. A Tuesday, Sophia said finally. I just need one Tuesday where I'm not terrified. Marcus Hale had given a great deal of money away in his 33 years. He had foundations. He had charitable initiatives that teams of people managed with spreadsheets and annual reports and gala dinners where everyone wore black and congratulated one another on their generosity. He had signed checks with more zeros than most people encountered in their lifetimes, and he had felt good about this in the distant, conceptual way one feels good about things that are morally correct and practically managed by other people. He had never before felt the specific, staggering inadequacy of money the way he did sitting on a plaza bench listening to a 28-year-old woman say she just needed one Tuesday without terror. The inadequacy wasn't in the amount. He could have written a check that solved Sophia Reyes's material circumstances so thoroughly that she never had another anxious Tuesday in her life. He knew this. The inadequacy was something else. The particular hollowness of realizing that what a person actually needs is not always the thing that can be transferred. What Sophia needed was time that was hers. Safety that was real rather than precarious. The ordinary miracle of a Tuesday where she could simply be a mother without simultaneously performing the exhausting gymnastics of someone holding everything together with insufficient materials. These were not checkbook problems. They were architecture of a life problems, and they required different tools. He went back to his office that evening. Lily had fallen asleep against his shoulder on the bench and had to be carefully transferred to Sophia, who held her with the practiced ease of a woman who had been the sole holder of this particular weight for 3 years, and he sat at his desk for a long time doing nothing, which was extremely unlike him. Then he called his head of HR. Sophia Reyes, he said. Building Services. I want to review her position. A pause on the line. Sir, is there a performance issue? The opposite, he said. I want to understand what she's doing and whether we're using her correctly. He also called the head of his corporate daycare, the on-site facility on the 4th floor that served the children of executives and senior management, that had a waiting list and an enrollment committee and all the quiet exclusivity that things acquire when demand exceeds supply in a building that runs on hierarchy. Is there space? He asked. For executive families, Mr. Hale, the list is... Is there space? He repeated patiently. Another pause. There is one opening. The Hendersons' youngest aged out last month. Hold it, he said. I'll let you know. He sat at his desk another hour. He was being careful, more careful than he was used to being because the usual machinery of his decision-making, identify problem, allocate resource, solve, proceed, was not the right machinery here. Sophia Reyes was not a problem to be solved. She was a person with dignity intact and opinions about what help was permitted to look like, and steamrolling her with resources because he had them would be the specific kind of harm that dresses itself as kindness and never notices the difference. He thought about the $5 bill. Lily had placed it on the counter, without hesitation. Everything she had. No calculation, no strategy, just the pure instinct that said this person needs something, and I have something to give. 3 years old, and already more graceful at generosity than most adults he had ever met. What, he asked himself, would Lily do?
He knew, actually.
Lily would show up. She would sit down. She would offer what she had and trust the other person to decide what to do with it. He went back on Wednesday morning. He didn't use the basement entrance this time. That felt like hiding, and he was done with hiding from things he actually wanted. He asked his assistant to let him know when the building services team finished their morning rotation, and at the time he was given, he rode the elevator down and walked to the break room and knocked on the open door. Sophia looked up from her coffee, and the expression on her face went through several complete transformations in about 1 second. I'm not following you, he said, because it seemed important to establish this clearly. You literally came to my break room, she said. I know. That's because I wanted to talk to you, and this is where you are. He sat in his chair. It had become, without ceremony, his chair, the one with the wobble on the left rear leg, and folded his hands on the table. I want to offer you something.
You can say no.
That's a real option, not a performance. You can say no and nothing changes. She watched him carefully. Lily was not here today. Tuesday was the only day Sophia brought her. The break room felt different without her. Quieter in a way that had texture. The daycare on 4, he said. There's a spot open. It's free for employees. All employees. I'm clarifying this because apparently the information was never properly communicated to the building services staff, and I intend to fix that, but separately from this conversation. He paused. Lily would be safe and nearby, and you could work knowing she was 4 floors above you. Sophia said nothing. Her coffee cup sat untouched in front of her. I'm also moving you, he continued, to the facilities coordination team. It's an administrative position. Regular hours. Better pay. It was posted internally last month, but the posting apparently didn't circulate below management level, which is also something I'm going to address separately.
He stopped.
These are real positions that exist. You would be qualified. HR agrees. I'm not manufacturing anything. The silence stretched. Why? She asked. Not suspicious. Genuinely asking. The honest question she always asked. Because you're talented and you've been here 14 months, and you have perfect attendance, and you stayed 2 hours late on a flooded floor without being asked, and this building has not been using you correctly. He looked at her steadily. That's the professional reason. And the personal reason? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Your daughter used every dollar she had to buy a stranger a burger, he said finally. Because that's who she is. Which means that's who you raised her to be. He looked at his folded hands. I grew up in a house where we were sometimes very short on money. Not always. But enough that I remember what it felt like to worry about the next thing. I built everything I have in direct response to that feeling, and I have spent a lot of years using work as the solution to problems that work can't actually solve. He looked up. I don't think you should have to do the same thing. I think Lily should have a Tuesday that isn't about survival. That's the personal reason. Sophia's eyes were brilliant again. She looked at the table. She looked at her coffee. She pressed her lips together. I don't want your charity, she said quietly, not as accusation but as information. I know, he said. This isn't charity. Charity is when I write a check and feel good about it. This is me trying to understand what you actually need, which you told me yesterday, and seeing whether anything I have access to is useful.
He paused.
There's a difference between someone handing you a thing because it makes them feel powerful and someone sitting across from you and saying you deserve more than this. I'm trying to do the second thing. I might be doing it imperfectly. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee and took a slow sip and set it down, and he watched a decision move through her in real time. The risk assessment of a person who had learned to be careful, arriving at a conclusion that surprised her. "Show me the job description," she said. November arrived and brought with it the particular quality of New York City light that made everything look like the opening frame of a story, amber and precise, cutting between buildings at angles that made even ordinary things appear as though they mattered. Sophia had taken the position. It had not been simple or without complication. She had read the job description 3 times, had asked HR specific questions about reporting structure and benefits and whether the daycare spot was contingent on her employment in a specific role, and had negotiated, with quiet precision, a schedule that allowed her to pick Lily up from the 4th floor by 3:30 every afternoon. Marcus had learned about this negotiation secondhand and had felt something that he eventually identified as admiration of a fairly significant magnitude. He had also, in the interest of full transparency and because he was more afraid of doing the wrong thing here than he was of most things in his professional life, told Sophia that he found himself thinking about her with a frequency that suggested it was no longer a professional matter, and that he was mentioning this so she had full information, and that it changed nothing about her position or their professional relationship regardless of what she did with that information. She had looked at him for a very long time. Then she had said, "I've been trying to figure out if you were too good to be real." "What's your current assessment?" he'd asked. "Still gathering data," she'd said, which he found more encouraging than a direct answer would have been, because it meant she was still looking. What followed were 6 weeks of something that had no formal name, but that existed in the spaces between formal things. Morning coffee in the break room, which now felt like a place he went to rather than a place he found himself. Lunch in the plaza, all 3 of them, on what had become their bench, Lily conducting ongoing architectural experiments with French fries and holding court about the relative merits of various cloud shapes. The 3 of them in the small park 2 blocks from Sophia's apartment on 2 separate Saturdays, Lily in furious pursuit of pigeons, Marcus learning that Sophia had wanted to be an architect before life redirected her, Sophia learning that Marcus had rebuilt his company twice from near collapse and still sometimes had dreams about the first version of his original code. He learned her coffee order. Oat milk, 1 sugar, slightly stronger than the machine's standard setting, which she achieved by running the first half of the cycle twice. He learned that she sang to Lily in Spanish at bedtime and that Lily's elephant was named Señor Peanuts and that she had been calling Marcus Ella not because of the elephant but, Sophia quietly revealed, because the first thing Lily had said after he left that first Tuesday was, "Mama, that man was nice. He has a nice Ella," and when Sophia had said, "Heart, baby, he has a kind heart," Lily had nodded with great seriousness and said, "Ella," and pointed at her own chest, and so the name had been given and settled. Heart. In her 3-year-old translation. She had looked at him and seen his heart. He was not, to be clear, a man without edges. Sophia found the edges in the usual way, a Tuesday night in late November when she mentioned, casually, that Lily had been asking about taking the subway and Marcus had said, without thinking, that he could arrange a car, and she had set down her fork and said very clearly that she did not need him to arrange a car and that she was not in his life to be serviced by his resources, and that if this was the shape he expected the dynamic to take then they should discuss that now. He had sat with that for a moment, the sting of it, and then the understanding underneath the sting, and had said, "You're right.
I'm sorry.
Tell me about the subway." And she had. And Lily had sat between them on her phone playing a game about sorting vegetables, and the evening had continued. He was learning. He was not particularly good at learning to receive as well as give. 33 years of being the one who provided had calcified into a default, but he was applying himself to it with the same focused intention he brought to things he cared about, which was all the intention he had. Sophia was learning too. She was learning to name things she wanted without immediately accounting for the cost of wanting them. She was learning that her voice in a room mattered to him, not as a performance of caring, but as an actual operational fact, the way north matters to a compass. She was learning that Lily's instinct, which had never in 3 years been wrong, had looked at this man and said heart and had been, as it turned out, correct. Christmas arrived with a quietness Marcus had not experienced in years. His usual holiday involved 12 events and a PR strategy and a charitable donation announced in a press release. This year it involved a small apartment in Queens with paper snowflakes Lily had made taped to the window and a pot of Sophia's mother's recipe for pozole on the stove and senior peanuts wearing a tiny paper hat that Lily had constructed and which had already fallen off twice and been repaired with the same serious engineering focus she brought to all structural problems. Marcus had brought one gift for Lily, a stuffed elephant, full-sized, both eyes present and accounted for, soft in the particular dense way that suggests longevity, and one gift for Sophia, which was a small envelope containing 2 tickets to the architectural exhibition at the Met that she had mentioned in passing 6 weeks ago, in the way that people mention things they want without expecting them to be remembered. He had remembered. She opened it and looked at the tickets and then looked at him, and whatever remained of the wall she had been managing with great skill and reasonable justification came down all at once, quietly, like snow. Lily named the new elephant Marcus. She continued to call the human Marcus Ella. The old senior peanuts and the new Marcus the elephant were arranged side by side against her pillow, and she introduced them to each other with the gravity of a diplomat managing an important alliance. After Lily was asleep, Sophia had let him be there for this, the specific, careful, ordinary intimacy of a child being put to bed, and he understood what it meant that she had let him. They sat in the small kitchen with the pozole and the good quiet, and Marcus looked at this woman across a table that was not his and thought about all the tables he owned that had never felt this full. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay," she said with her coffee. "I've been afraid of being ordinary my whole life," he said. "Not mediocre, ordinary. The kind of person who sits in a kitchen on Christmas with someone he loves and feels that this is enough. I built everything I have partly because I was afraid of that kind of stillness." He looked at the table. "I'm not afraid of it anymore. I don't know when that changed." She knew when. He knew she knew. Neither of them said it, because some things don't need to be said because they're already present. "I have a question," she said quietly. "Ask it." "Lily asked you in October if you could be her daddy at dinner." Her eyes were steady on his, careful and clear. "What did you want to say?" "Not what you said. What you wanted to say." The pozole was good. The paper snowflakes were in the window. Senor Peanuts and Marcus the elephant were keeping watch over a sleeping child, and inside the man who had built a billion-dollar fortress against the terror of stillness, something old and exhausted and finished with its own defenses, sat down at last. "Yes," he said. "That's what I wanted to say." February brought the cold that New York saves for February, the kind that doesn't apologize for itself, that comes through coats and certainty alike and reminds everyone that warmth is something you have to build rather than something the world provides. Marcus Hale had been building warmth for 4 months, which was the most productive 4 months of his life, by any measure he currently cared about. He had also been building something else, something small and specific and important, that he had been working on with more care than he had given any deal in his professional history. He had measured it wrong twice and started over. He had asked 3 people for opinions and disregarded all 3 because they were giving him the opinions they thought he wanted, which was not useful. He had sat with it in the evenings after calls and before sleep, turning it over in his mind the way you turn a stone to find its best face. He was not nervous. Marcus Hale did not get nervous. He got precise. It was a Sunday. Sophia's mother, a small, decisive woman named Carmen who had looked at Marcus the first time she met him with the same scientific seriousness her granddaughter deployed and reached her conclusions in approximately 90 seconds, after which she had fed him enough pozole to constitute a medical event, was watching Lily for the afternoon. This had been arranged by Marcus in advance. He had been transparent about the arrangement because he had discovered that Sophia responded poorly to maneuvering and well to honesty, which was itself one of the things he loved about her, and he had learned to love it even when it meant the honest thing was harder. He took her to the plaza.
Their plaza by now.
Theirs and Lily's, though Lily was absent today, which gave the bench a different quality. Still theirs, but a private version. The way a place you share with someone feels different when you have it to yourselves. The fountain was still off. It wouldn't run again until April, but the bench was in full afternoon sun and warmer than the air deserved. They sat with coffee from the food truck, which had become a kind of ritual, and Marcus thought about $5 on a counter, and a song heard around a corner, and the word elephant in a small voice that had found his heart before he'd known it was findable. "I want to talk about Lily's question," he said. Sophia turned to look at him. "She asked me if I could be her daddy at dinner," he said. "I've been thinking about it for 4 months. Not as a problem to solve. As a question to answer honestly." He set his coffee down on the bench beside him. "I want to be there for dinner. I want to be there for breakfast. I want to be there when she figures out that the French fry tower needs a wider base, and when she names every animal at the zoo, and when she decides she loves architecture the way you do and goes after it differently than you had to." He looked at Sophia steadily. "I want to be there for you. For all of it. Not because you need me to be, you have demonstrated conclusively that you don't need anyone, but because I would like to. Because this is the most I have felt like a complete person in 33 years, and that happened on a Tuesday in a break room where a 3-year-old handed me a hippopotamus-shaped cracker, and I was too surprised by it to be anything other than honest." Sophia's eyes were brilliant. She did not look away. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out the small box. Not elaborate, no theater, just the thing itself, present and real and chosen with the full weight of his attention. "The ring was my grandmother's," he said. "She came to this country with nothing and built a life worth everything, and she gave it to me when she was 91 and told me to give it to someone who made the world make sense." He opened the box. "You make the world make sense. You and Lily. You make everything I've done feel like it was going somewhere worth arriving at." Sophia pressed her hand over her mouth. "I have a favor to ask," he said, and he found in this moment that he was using the same words Lily had used, the small, clear ask of a person who knows what they need and trusts the other person enough to say it. He had learned this from a 3-year-old who had looked at the world and seen it as fundamentally willing, if you were honest with it. "Will you marry me?" The fountain was dry, and the bench was warm, and the February sky above the glass towers of Midtown was the clear, deep blue of something that has been cold long enough to go transparent. Sophia took her hand from her mouth. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. He watched the decision move through her, not the fearful, self-protective calculation he had watched in October, but something different. Something that trusted its own reading of a person. Lily had named him Heart. Sophia had spent 4 months confirming the accuracy of the assessment. She was thorough, and the evidence was conclusive. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger, and she looked at it in the afternoon light, and made a sound that was half laugh and half something older and more relieved than laughter, and he put his arms around her on their bench in their plaza, and held on to her with all the warmth he had been building, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the specific, irreplaceable thing money could not buy, and status could not manufacture, and success could not approximate. The feeling that you are in exactly the right place with exactly the right person at exactly the right moment, and that all the lost and frightened years were only the long way around to hear.
They were quiet for a while.
Then Sophia said, "Lily is going to absolutely lose her mind." "I know," he said. "She's going to want to wear a dress with a very specific number of flowers on it." "I'll take her shopping," he said. "Whatever she wants. She'll want to bring Senor Peanuts to the wedding. Obviously. And Marcus the elephant." "Both elephants," he agreed. "Full attendance. Sophia laughed, the real laugh, the one that escaped before she could decide if it was safe, and he had learned by now that this was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, better than applause or the close of any deal. She leaned against him on the bench, her ring catching the February light, and the city moved around them the way cities do, enormous and indifferent, and yet somehow, in this specific pocket of it, containing exactly everything that mattered. He thought about Carmen asking him, the second time they met, with her direct grandmother's eyes, "What do you want, young man?" Not from her. For yourself. What do you actually want? He hadn't known how to answer then. He had given her something about security and partnership and building something lasting, which were all true and all insufficient because they were answers about outcomes rather than the raw human thing underneath the outcomes. Now he knew what he would say. He would say, this bench, this coffee, this woman who negotiated her own schedule with HR and reads job descriptions 3 times and names what she needs without apology. This child who gave every dollar she had to buy a stranger something to eat and thought nothing of it because she hasn't yet learned that the world requires accounting. This. I want this. And what he had, sitting in the February sun with Sophia's hand in his and the fountain dry and the sky impossibly blue, was exactly that. A $5 bill had started it. A crumpled, beloved, pocket-warm $5 placed on a food truck counter by the smallest, most assured philanthropist in New York City. A toddler who had understood, without language for it, that the man with the gray hoodie and the sad fortress around his heart needed someone to see him clearly and extend the first trust. Lily had done that, had named him Heart and meant it and been right. Marcus made a note to tell her this when she was old enough to understand it, that she had changed the direction of his life with $5 and one favor and one perfectly honest question, the way 3-year-olds change things, completely and without trying, by simply being exactly who they are. That spring, in a ceremony with flowers and 2 formally dressed elephants and a small girl in a dress, with precisely 14 flowers on it who served as both flower girl and unofficial officiant by occasionally overriding the minister with commentary, Sophia Reyes and Marcus Hale were married in the same plaza where he had proposed, because Lily had stated with absolute authority that the Fountain Plaza was the best place, and no one who had any experience with Lily argued with her about things she was certain of. The fountain ran. They had asked the building management and it ran. And Lily, standing between the 2 people who made up her whole world, looked at the water, and then up at her mother, and then up at the man she had decided to love before he'd had any idea what was happening to him, and she said, with perfect 3-year-old gravity, "Ella." You came. He crouched down to her level, as he had on the sidewalk 6 months ago, and he looked at her enormous dark eyes and her 14-flower dress and Senor Peanuts tucked under her arm, and he said the truest thing he knew. "I came, baby. I'm not going anywhere." And he meant it with every repaired, opened, finally quiet piece of him. He meant it the way fortresses mean their own disassembly when they finally understand that the walls were keeping out the one thing they were actually built to protect. He meant it forever. And that was enough. That was everything. The end.